Gun to your head, what is the most important game ever made? Don't rush, it's a loaded question. Let's look at some candidates. Is the most important game ever made the first game ever made? Like what? Pong? Yeah, I don't know about that. Pong is not even the first game ever made, it's actually Tennis for Two. Yeah, not much better. I don't think it's fair to name the first of something the most important creation in the sphere. Look at the first movie ever made, Around Hay Garden Scene. Do you even know about this movie, if you could even call it that? We had computers, we had games. Combining the two was inevitable, and those first few games were very primitive. But hey, Space War is at least somewhat important. The first ever video game competition was a Space War competition called Intergalactic Space War Olympics. Damn, why don't we call competitions like that nowadays? We came a long way since the inception of video games, so let's look a little bit further in time, when video games were taking a tiny bit more seriously. Is the most important video game ever an arcade game? There is a bit more argument to that. Space Invaders is quite a recognizable game, probably impressed people at the time, but honestly, if you look at it now, once again, it's not very complex. But hey, we got Pac-Man later, now that's a recognizable name. Pac-Man accomplished a lot, honestly. The sound design in this game is so well done, everyone knows those noises and that music, of course. Pac-Man himself is probably the first video game protagonist we have ever seen. Sure, you could argue that this vehicle or whatever from Space Invaders is a real character, but none of them were a real brand, unlike Pac-Man, the first ever poster boy. And yes, I checked, Pac-Man is in fact a male. I'm not sure if he has any relationship with Miss Pac-Man though. Pac-Man is honestly quite a good game. You could play it and have a good time even today. You could even run it in Google. Fuck! Arcade games also gave us Donkey Kong. That's quite a known character, I'd say. Not as known as this little guy though. Mario is arguably the most famous video game character, and this was his first appearance, even though he didn't have his name yet, but still notable. I think it's also fair to say that arcade games introduced difficulty to games, and those fuckers were extremely difficult. Obviously, before we got home consoles, developers wanted to keep you playing on arcade for as long as possible, so that you would spend more coins, and raising the difficulty at the time meant putting a bunch of bullshit in your games. Limited lives, one-shot kills, time limits, all of that made those relatively short games take average players weeks to beat. Not the best design decision by today's standards. Arcade gaming is undoubtedly a very important period of video game history. Games like Contra, Galaga, even Street Fighter were all made for arcades and are all very important for the future of video games. But could I crown any of those games as the most important one? Probably no, since who the fuck even plays real arcades now? We moved on to better platforms that are most likely going to stick around for way longer, so let's move on to home consoles.
Magnavox presents Odyssey.
The first commercial video game console was Magnavox Odyssey, but is it even worth talking about? The poor thing couldn't even play audio or track scores. I guess it has its place in history, introducing an option to play games at home, but the games in question were like Pong. Yes, we are back to Pong. I guess it is the most important game ever. The actual home console that is worth mentioning has to be the NES, or Nintendo Entertainment System. This console gave us some niche titles like Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, Metroid, and Mega Man. Don't know if you've heard of those. All those games became huge franchises, and Mario with Zelda are still revolutionizing gaming in our age. We are now in the territory where the games we talk about are actually good contenders to be claimed the most important of all time. If someone said that Super Mario Bros. Is the single most influential video game, I wouldn't be mad. Mario literally gave gaming a new life in the 1980s, popularizing platformers as a genre and being an absolute staple of video games. Everyone knows Mario. It's like the Jesus Christ of gaming. The level design it introduced was so good it basically gave everyone a blueprint at the time. And all the iconic character designs were so bright and full of life. There is passion and creativity behind this game, and it deserved all the praise it received. Honestly, it's hard to debate it not being the most important game of all time, but there is still a lot of this video left, so you know I'm gonna try. It's crazy that there are still other Nintendo games that could be in the conversation that are all from the same period. The Legend of Zelda is basically responsible for creating open world game design, and future entries in the series kept improving it and introducing new features. Breath of the Wild essentially reinvented the genre and influenced my favorite game ever made. Metroid's world structure was so innovative it created its own genre, and Mega Man, well, I don't know much about Mega Man, to be honest, but people love it. I also can't leave out Nintendo's direct competitor at the time, Sega Genesis, and their mascot Sonic. Sonic was probably the first game to introduce the feeling of speed in games, if that makes sense. You can go pretty fast in Mario, I guess, but not as fast as in Sonic. In that game, you were rewarded for getting to the extreme levels of speed and taking risks to beat levels as fast as you can, and level design just helped to make everything flow together so well. Sonic himself is, in my opinion, a way more charismatic and interesting character than Mario, but can we really say that Sonic can compete with Mario in terms of influence, considering absolutely generational fall-off the series has experienced? I love Sonic. Those games, especially the early 3D games, are very nostalgic for me, but objectively speaking, the quality is just not there.
Sonic, wake up!
I was on a snooze cruise, I guess.
Good thing you're okay.
This whole topic honestly deserves its own separate video, so let me remind you to subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying this video. Thank you! Depending on how you view gaming and what you prioritize in it, one of those games could easily be crowned as the most important invention in the media, but I still want to give you more food for thought, so let's advance forward. Is the most important game ever made a first-person shooter? If you think about it, everything is a shooter now. Ratchet & Clank is a shooter, Marvel Rivals is a shooter, Slime Rancher is a fucking shooter, even Shadow got a couple blickies. It's hard to deny that shooters are not important for the evolution of gaming. Technically, the first FPS game is Maze Wars. It was the first game to implement things like peer-to-peer, minimaps and player avatars, but come on, look at that. I'm sure it was quite an impressive feat of technology back in the day, but it's a stretch to say that this game had any significant influence on the overall landscape of gaming. So let's take a look at the game that did, and that's Wolfenstein 3D. A lot of things Wolfenstein did were not really new, but it's about how it combined everything together. It's about the whole package. As we established, the first game to introduce first-person character controls was Maze War back in 1973, but in Wolfenstein you control an actual character with a name, and there is even some resemblance of a storyline here. Violence was extremely controversial at the time, and showing Nazis in the game got it banned in Germany. It seems like developers had a lot of fun making this, even poking fun at some players with their iconic difficulty options. We had shooting guns in games before, like in Contra for example, but doing it from a first-person view against enemies you could see in front of you was probably insane back then. Wolfenstein had a variety of enemies and guns, making the gameplay less repetitive. And sure, the level structure is not all that exciting, it's just navigating through a bunch of mazes, but they added secrets to spice things up and reward players for being curious and exploring. Even though it's called Wolfenstein 3D, it's not really 3D. The viewpoint is restricted to a single plane, meaning you can't look up or down, so I guess it's fair to call it a 2.5D game. Wolfenstein was a big breakthrough, but what's crazier is that just 1 year later we got Doom. ID Software were on some other level at the time, as just in 1 year they cooked up a follow-up to their massive success, making an even more iconic game that improved in basically every single way. Better level design, way more interesting sci-fi setting, larger selection of more creative weapons, unique and memorable enemies. It introduced dynamic lighting, modding, which got its own dedicated community, and of course multiplayer deathmatch. I don't even have to explain how important this was for the future of video games. Release of Doom crushed networks at the time, and its violence is the reason video game ratings boards exist. Doom was a cultural phenomenon, and for a good reason. You can downplay what this game did for the PC gaming landscape. Even nowadays, ID Software is releasing heat. I made a whole video discussing if Doom Eternal is the best modern FPS game, and it's certainly up there. So the answer is easy, right? Doom clearly deserves the title of the most important game. Well, I don't think we should stop here, because ID Software certainly didn't stop on Doom. Listen, I'm convinced that John Carmack is not a real human. He is a fucking force of nature. Because how do you program Wolfenstein and Doom back to back and then you go on to make Quake? The reason why esports exists is Quake. 3D engine developed for it was so innovative at the time. Nothing could compare to it. This time we are actually in 3D space. You can look up or down, jump and move up the stairs. The gameplay of Quake was insanely fast-paced, giving birth to some of the first movement nerds. Multiplayer for Quake was giga popular and revolutionary back then. This game alone created the arena shooter archetype. Sure, there were other games contributing, but Quake definitely deserves all the praise it got. As you can see, all of those shooters did a lot for video game space. Once again, it's very hard to to argue which one of those games was the most impactful, so I think it's time for me to get somewhat biased. Many games introduced groundbreaking concepts and technology, and you can take that away from them. However, I think there is a game that not only improved on everything its predecessors did, but also introduced new mechanics and ideas that absolutely flipped the industry on its head. Is the most important game ever made Half-Life? Look, Half-Life and Half-Life 2 are some of my favorite games ever made, and they are easily my favorite shooters ever. But bias aside, it's impossible to deny what those games did for the industry, especially Half-Life 1. As I said, it improved on many ideas previously introduced in other shooters. Everything in this game was fleshed out, from level design and gunplay to enemies and story. But apart from having an incredible foundation, this game built something truly special. Half-Life is made on Gold Source engine, also known as the Half-Life engine, which is essentially a heavily modded version of Quake's engine. Later, Gold Source would become what we know as simply the Source engine. And do I even have to explain how truly impactful Source games were? Half-Life was the first game to introduce this type of physics to a first-person game, and it changed everything, especially all the clever ways developers implemented physics into the actual gameplay. Storytelling in this game was also incredibly innovative for its genre, because it's a completely seamless story told with zero cutscenes.
They're waiting for you, Gordon, in the test chamber.
Everything is showcased with set pieces, and very advanced AI just helped the process. World building in this game is also incredible. All those bizarre monsters and crazy events that take place in Half-Life are incredibly well crafted, and locations like Black Mesa and later Zen are very interesting environments to explore. The game is truly timeless. Valve accomplished something special with Half-Life, and its impact was massive. Team Fortress was a mod for Quake, but Valve bought and made a version on Gold Source, later releasing Team Fortress 2, which is one of the most iconic multiplayer shooters of all time. Half-Life was the reason Team Fortress 2 was made, and Team Fortress 2 is the reason games like Overwatch or Marvel Rivals exist. Counter-Strike was initially released as a mod for Half-Life and later purchased by Valve, which gave us Counter-Strike Source and later Counter-Strike Global Offensive, now CS2. Counter-Strike itself inspired games like Valorant. Portal and Portal 2 were made because of Half-Life's success, and they're arguably the best puzzle games out there. Same deal with Left 4 Dead. Valve went on to create the biggest storefront for purchase of digital games and created an absolute monopoly. Garry's Mod is also notable. I talked about it a bunch in my previous video, and it's one of the most important sandbox games to ever come out. It has a large player base till this day. Half-Life might not be the first game to do a bunch of things, but I do think it caused gaming industry, at least PC gaming industry, to take a whole new direction. It's a game I deeply love, and I don't know how many people can agree, but for me, it is the most important game ever made. Even Gen Alpha is experiencing the impact of Half-Life. I mean, look at Skibidi Toilet, it's even in Fortnite. Wait. Is the most important game of all time fucking Fortnite? Listen, I'm only half memeing here, but I do want to bring up the current landscape of gaming at least a tiny bit. I think when people discuss the most influential blank, they always look back, which makes sense. Music, movies or games that came out a long time ago had enough time to marinate in our minds, which makes it easier for us to estimate how much they truly managed to accomplish. We also get to see the results of their influence and how it affects art that is coming out now. But I want to have a bit of fun and kind of speculate. What about the current most popular game? Does it have the potential to go down in history as the most important game ever? Fortnite is a video game, the game. It's unbelievable how successful and widespread it is. Everybody knows about Fortnite, probably because everybody is in Fortnite. Collaborations between IPs is kind of like a modern cheat code for success. Combining multiple audiences together is extremely beneficial for everyone involved. And Fortnite is simply the king of collaborations. Epic Games basically hit a goldmine. They had an okay game that no one really cared about and decided to do something with it instead of letting it be forgotten. So they made a mode for it, which was blowing up at the time, Battle Royale. But they added their own little twist to it, which is building. Fortnite's Battle Royale came out at a perfect time, when people were drooling over this genre. So it started gaining momentum, and Epic Games did a perfect job to help it snowball. The rest is history. No matter how you feel about it, the consequences of Fortnite can be seen in every live service multiplayer game, or even in games that have no reason to be live service. Fortnite popularized battle passes, which is a thing we won't be able to escape for God knows how long, and everyone is doing collabs with different games or shows nowadays, also part of the Fortnite effect. And if you look at the game right now, it seems like it's constantly absorbing things, becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. Fortnite is a shooter game, Fortnite is a racing game, Fortnite is Guitar Hero, Fortnite is Minecraft but Lego, Fortnite is also Roblox. They're straight up taking it to some other level we haven't seen before. I think in a decade or two, people will have a completely different outlook on Fortnite and its legacy, because I don't see them slowing down at any point this decade. For all I know, Fortnite might be even more relevant in like 20 years. I just think it's interesting to try and predict which current games might influence future generations, and the Big F is definitely one that we're going to hear people talk about for years to come. This video was kind of loaded, yet still there are games that I haven't mentioned at all. I haven't mentioned strategy games, even though they are definitely important. Just look at Dota and League. Those games came from Warcraft 3, basically. I also haven't talked about MMOs, this is a whole separate can of worms, or even something like mobile games. They could somewhat take part in this conversation. As you can see, it's hard to discern the single most important game. If you think about it, video games as a media haven't even been around for that long, relative to most things. Hopefully, I gave you some interesting topics to think about, but ultimately it all comes down to our own perspective on things. So, what is the most important game for you?